Hello, Forecaster here again, and we are back for episode 135. Now, first off, in the last episode, you may have noticed that I had a very quiet and strange guest. And that was my way of hinting that my mod pack is now available for download as of this video. So there's going to be a card in the top right corner linking to a different video where I will be talking more about this, how to get the pack, what's in it, and such, as well as something about guest appearances on the Let's Play. So go check that out if you're interested in that. Now we're going to move on with this episode. So, since the last episode, there's been some changes to the factory. The major one is that the controller program has been overhauled, and it has been overhauled by Vexados himself, who is he's a mod developer who does an add-on, a major add-on for open computers, and he's very experienced with Lua, more so than me. So he's looked over the program, which I left in a very broken state after trying to make some changes to it and then got distracted by something else. So I left the program in a non-working state halfway through. And he apparently couldn't resist fixing it because, well, I didn't really ask him to, but here we are. And I don't mind because it would have been painful for me to have to remember how it worked and such. And I was having a little trouble with it, getting back into this, especially with this tiny screen, which I hate programming on. I find it really difficult. But the factory now works again, and it has also been updated to handle recipes that output multiple items. And I don't mean recipes that output multiple different items. I mean recipes like the plank recipe, which output 4 of the same item. Now, previously, the factory asked you to tell it how many you wanted of something. So you chose the recipe, and then you chose how many you wanted. Now, if I said I wanted, I said planks and then 4, the factory would actually interpret that as crafting the plank recipe 4 times, without knowing that the plank recipe actually outputs 4 planks with 1 craft. So it would end up with 16 planks instead of my 4. Now, thanks to this number in the recipe definition, the factory is aware that the plank recipe outputs 4 planks at a time. So it should, if I say I want 4 planks, it should only craft the recipe 1 time. And if I say I want 6 planks, it should craft it 2 times, and I should end up with 2 extra planks as a necessity. There's also been some other minor changes to make it a little better in some ways. I think this bit here, this was made by Vexados, and it creates a separate table that is then sorted so that the recipes are displayed in alphabetical order by the name. Before, they were just drawn out in the order they were defined up here, which apparently wasn't good enough. Anyway, I didn't mind that so much. I think that's pretty much it. We can exit out of that, go into craft. No, not craft. Craft. You can now also use either the index or the name. Originally, I had the program ask for the name, which turned out to be kind of tedious to have to type in the name each time you wanted to craft something. So I later changed it to use the index instead, except I didn't update the question it asks, or the prompt here, so it still said name, which confused me when I tried to use the program recently and tried to type the name in and wondered why it wasn't working. The program now takes both, and I've updated the prompt as well, as you can see. So it's you can either specify the number or the name. The program also restarts from the beginning after it's done crafting. Before, it would just shut down and you would have to start it again. But I thought it would be handy if it restarted itself or just kept running, looping back, because most likely you would want it to do that because you wanted to craft the next thing. So yeah. Now the next step, I think, will be to allow the program to determine when components are missing smartly. Currently, when it tries to craft something, for example this transistor here, what it does is it tries to pull this package out from the slot here. If it can do that, that means that, of course, that all of the components were necessary to make this package, and it will pull it out, put it into the locker, and it will be sent to be stamped. If it can't, it will assume that one of the components are missing. Now this doesn't require anything else in the factory, so the program can't do anything about that. So it would just sit and wait. However, if for example we are trying to craft the microchip, which requires transistors, it would assume that the transistors are missing, and that's why it can't pull this out. So it would then try to craft transistors. Now there was actually a problem we encountered while we were working on the program, me and Vexidos, where the factory was missing something that wasn't transistors here. There was some other component missing. So it tried crafting transistors indefinitely until in an attempt to be able to make the microchip, which was not good. It produced a lot of transistors, like all of these, by accident. So yeah, that is fixed now. It shouldn't do that anymore. If there is a component missing that is not something it can craft, it should just sit and wait for it. However, I would like for it to be able to tell which component is missing, even if it's not something it can make, and then ask for that component on the screen here, which it can't currently do. But that is a project for me off camera. Something I'm going to have to work out over time. I am planning to upgrade this computer to have a tier 2 screen instead of a tier 1, so I can program better. I'm also going to need to update the chassis, of course, and the graphics card. So what we are actually going to work on in this episode is the boiler here. Now, as you might remember, I have a drone called Maggie, whose job it is to supply the crucible furnace and the boiler with fuel from the fuel tank down by the reservoir in the basement, deep basement. Now, I've run an experiment in a creative world that took quite a long time to complete. It was self-sufficient, of course. What I did was I had two small high-pressure boilers next to each other. I supplied both of them with 2 Railcraft tanks worth of fuel. So 64 buckets, I think. No, 32 buckets should be. Yes. Now the difference was that one boiler got access to all of the fuel it wanted at the same time. The other one was restricted to only get 100 millibuckets at a time. And the reason for this was I wanted to see if that had an effect on the fuel efficiency of the boiler. Now, the way I achieved that restriction was using a fluid hopper from Railcraft, one of these. And because turns out there are very few ways to control fluid flow with the mods I have in a nice and steady way. So the reason the fluid hopper worked is that it is by default very slow, or relatively slow. It only transfers 100 millibuckets in a second, and it transfers 100 millibuckets at a time. So it's very easy to control. So we're going to use this to apply this to this boiler here. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to set this to enable on low signal. Now we're going to need a gate, and we're going to need a gate with turn that back on. You're going to need a gate with filter slots. So we're going to need a gold gate because I don't have any quartz gates. That would also work, but gold will do fine. Now the reason we need a filter slot is because we're going to set this to fluid in tank, and then we're going to need some fuel, and I have some in a tank here that I've had to put away. That will work. So we'll say when there's fuel in the boiler, and we need to specify because there's also steam and water in the boiler, so we don't want the gate to detect those. Dang it. I want this to stay. Actually, it doesn't matter because it's a structure pipe, duh. So we wanted this to output a redstone signal when there is any fuel in the boiler. And as we set this fluid hopper to be enabled on a low signal, when the redstone signal is on, this hopper is going to be off. This means that as long as there is fuel in the boiler, this hopper is not going to be allowed to input anything. As soon as the boiler is completely empty of fuel, as you can see, I have cut the supply line for this boiler for now, so it's been emptying. As soon as it empties completely, the hopper will turn on because the redstone signal will turn off. The hopper will be allowed to input 100 millibuckets of fuel, and then there will be fuel in the boiler again, so the redstone signal will turn back on, and the hopper will turn off. So there will only be 100 millibuckets of fuel in the boiler at a time. Now, the reason for doing this, there are two reasons. One is, of course, that, as you may or may not know, you cannot pull fuel or water out of a boiler. It only outputs steam. So once you've put fuel in the boiler, you can't get it back out, and the boiler will run until the fuel runs out. So the only way to actually control the boiler effectively is to limit its fuel access. So if you put 16 buckets of fuel in it, you can't turn the boiler off until it's run out of that, or you can turn the boiler off by cutting its fuel flow, but it's still going to burn through those 16 buckets of fuel. And if you want to have more control than that, you're going to have to limit the amount of fuel you put in at a time. And the way I'm going to do that is with this hopper, of course. Now, the second reason is the result of the experiment I ran. So I had these two boilers running side by side using the same amount of fuel. And at the end, they had both produced a whole lot of fuel, like several thousand, I think it was 15,000 or so buckets, something like that. And there was a small difference. The boiler, which had its fuel access restricted, actually ran for a bit longer, produced a few, like 50 buckets or so, more steam, which is not a lot at all. Like, it's an insignificant amount extra. But it did improve fuel efficiency ever so slightly, which adds up over time. So that, coupled with the increased control, which might be useful. Say I want to turn the boiler off and run off the nuclear reactor to conserve fuel, because I have a lot of uranium, and I might want to use that for a while. If I have 16 buckets of fuel in the boiler, it's going to take a while to shut down. If I only have 100 millibuckets in there, it's going to shut down fairly quickly. So, that makes it very worthwhile to implement this system. So, this is pretty much it. We only need this hopper, a gate to control it. Now, if you have a 1x1 boiler, you might have to get a little creative with where you put the gate to make it work. I'm not sure about that. But yeah, so now all we need to do, I have the drone Maggie in here, who's responsible for supplying these 2 points with fuel. She's currently configured to input the fuel into the boiler in this block here. And of course I don't want that. What I want is for her to, and I verified this is the selected block here, and you can see that the coordinates match. We have -685 and 960, and -685 and 960. So I'm going to want to change this simply by selecting this hopper instead. No, not opening the interface. And we're going to change this area, get rid of that, and input that instead. And then we're going to update the program in the drone. And now, if we set Maggie loose, it's going to zip off over in this direction pretty jumpily because of my stupid computer. It's going to go down to the fuel output, get an inventory full of fuel. Pretty sure the drones can carry 16 buckets by default. I don't think she has any inventory upgrades or dispenser upgrades. Whoops. Ow. Well, my leggings caught most of that, I think. I didn't mean to dive down into the hole. I'm not sure how I managed that. Let's turn on the night vision. Oh well. Fortunately, I have a way out. Ah, stupid Twitch reactions. Whatever happened. I think I might have accidentally double tapped the direction there and dived sideways into the hole. I think that's what happened. Maybe. Right. I don't think we will make it before the drone, but we should still see the result. Yeah, there we are. So you fill the hopper. Now the hopper is full of gasoline, but it's not filling up the boiler because it's being kept off by the redstone signal, like I predicted. We also have a lever here, which I might have put here for this explicit purpose because it doesn't control this water hopper. So I can use this if I want to permanently shut off the boiler, even though it's out of fuel, by turning on this lever, which can be useful. Maybe I should... No, I don't want to put it next to the engine or under the engine. Because that would turn it on, which I don't want. So let's just leave it on the floor. But yeah, this should work fine. Now, we'll see once the boiler has actually run out of fuel, which I'm not going to wait for in this episode. We can check on that in the next one, perhaps. But yeah, so let's go check on the refinery. I restarted that earlier, which I had to do because of that update bug with the universal sensor, which you might recall that it doesn't update this redstone wire, so when the chunk loads, so if it was on when the chunk unloaded, it keeps being on even though this has completely cooled down, which keeps the refinery from running, of course. It looks like the LPG storage tanks are full, which is bad. We are going to want to open that, get the Amadron tablet, make sure that is selected, and we're going to sell some LPG just to clear out the tanks. And unfortunately I can only sell 16 buckets at a time because Railcraft have problems with Buildcraft tanks for some reason. Let's see, I have plenty of emeralds, don't really need more, but I'm mostly doing this to get rid of the LPG because it chokes the refinery, and I need it to refine more fuel. The new logistics setup has worked a lot better when I upgraded to high pressure tubes on the requesting side. It seems to work flawlessly now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the refinery, it used to have problems when one of the refinery tanks was full like this. There was too much fluid for the low pressure to actually move anywhere. But now when I have the requesting side on the tanks be high pressure, they are now able to pull all of the fluid at once. To the tanks. And it can't pull smaller amounts at a time because that would be too easy. Yeah. And before I didn't know that the logistics modules supported high pressure because of Wyla. When you look at a module on a pipe, it tells you the max pressure of the pipe and not the module itself. So when you look at the logistics modules on the normal pipe, you'll see it says max pressure 5 bar. which is technically accurate because it inherits the max pressure from the pipe, technically. Well, if the pipe explodes, the module will also explode, of course. So that tricked me. I thought that, or I assumed that that meant that logistics modules only supported 5 bars at the most. Where are my drones? Why? Why aren't the drones coming? They should have been here by now. The way is free. How odd. Let's try again. I have done this before. It shouldn't matter that I'm doing multiple orders at a time. It should work fine. It does take a few seconds for them to arrive, but they should be here. I don't understand why they would dawdle. Come on. This has worked fine before. Maybe it's the weather. Yeah, it's not even raining. Not that should matter, actually. Really, for the mod. I was just kidding. But this is weird. I know this is supposed to work, and it has worked in the past. So I have no clue why it's not now. That's annoying. I might just have to expand LPG storage a bit to get more room. It also seems that this gas lift here is not pumping up any oil from the reservoir for some reason, which is also weird. It has pressure. Let's draw in the tubes, I guess. There's still plenty of oil in here for now, but it is going to have to pull up the rest eventually. Right. Let's try that now. Okay, so just put down all of the tubes. Maybe it's having issues with flowing blocks or something. I might have to put a Railcraft pump here instead, because it really seems like the gas lift doesn't like flowing blocks at all. Maybe it's because I selected that tank. It might be blocked by the fake air block that is in front of this. Maybe if I select this tank block instead. Let's try this one more time. Then we are unfortunately going to have to end this episode. Let's hope this works. Oh, hello. Yeah, that might have been the problem. They might not have been able to see or get. They thought they couldn't get to this tank because of the fake air light block that this lamp produces. Yes, hello. Yes, more emeralds for me. So now the refinery is running again, producing all sorts of stuff. Well, technically only LPG and gasoline, because I crack all the diesel and kerosene to get more gasoline. But yeah, I'll probably sell 4 tanks worth of LPG from this one as well, because this is going to fill up again before the oil runs out. I know it. It always does. I'll probably buy some stuff off camera, maybe some food. Notice that there is pork and beef steak for sale. Also redstone. I might buy some redstone. But now it is time to end this episode. And I have no idea what we'll do in the next one as usual. But you'll see then. And until then, I'll see you in the next episode.